Yo, what's up? Welcome back to another episode of the Swiss College Football Week 11. We're into Saturday. Obviously, a ton of action on the board. Same as every week, I'm going to get through as many games as I can. Whatever I don't get to, we'll go through on the live show. 10 a.m. Eastern time up to kickoff. We'll be live for 2 straight hours. Go through pretty much the 27, 28 biggest games on the board. So if you're able to make it, we'd love to see you in the live show. Saturday, Week 11. Let's go.
Welcome to the Swiss. The Swiss. Hey, get the Swiss.
First up, we got Minnesota on the road in Piscataway. For this one, we got Rutgers catching 6 or 6.5, depending on our sportsbook. Total sitting at 46 or 46.5. Let's get into this matchup, and we'll start with Minnesota's offense against Rutgers' defense. At first glance at this graphic here, it looks like this should be a favorable matchup for the Gophers. Rutgers has been a terrible defensive team so far this year. Right before the season started, they lost their defensive captain, best defensive player, inside linebacker for the season, and it's been a downhill skid ever since. They're 109th in yards per play allowed, 115th in success rate. Numbers against the run are absolutely abysmal. 117th in yards per carry allowed, 123rd in success rate per rush. Minnesota, as we know, exceeding our expectations this year offensively. Max Brosmer, or Brosmer. I was calling him Brosmer. Someone told me it was Brosmer. Now I'm hearing it's actually Brosmer. However you say his name, he looks great throwing the ball. That being said, no question, he's looked much better in his home games at Minnesota. In his 3 road games, Minnesota as a team, 5.83 yards per pass attempt, 40.9% success rate per dropback, 221.3 passing yards per game. So hasn't been nearly as effective throwing the ball on the road. That being said, I mean, it's Rutgers defense, and they can't seem to stop anybody. In their last 3 games, they're allowing 310.3 passing yards per game, 59.3% success rate per dropback, 9.9 yards per pass attempt. So even though Brosmer hasn't been quite as good on the road, is Rutgers defense even capable of stopping them? They certainly don't have much of a pass rush, just 86 in pressure rate, 119th in sack rate. Brosmer on the season when given a clean pocket has been great. A minus, A, C in yards per attempt, but for the most part, if you give him a clean pocket, he is able to make the throws. So I don't have a ton of faith in the Rutgers defense here. And yeah, Minnesota has been struggling to give Brosmer some run support in the last 3 games. Just 3.74 yards per carry, 37% success rate per rush, 104.7 rushing yards per game. So Minnesota not really running the ball very well. That being said, Rutgers hasn't been able to stop anybody on the ground all season. Hasn't changed. In the last 3 games, 5.41 yards per carry allowed, 50% success rate per rush, over 180 rushing yards allowed per game. So even though on the road where Brosmer hasn't been nearly as good, even though the run game hasn't really been there, it's tough to have faith in this Rutgers defense based on what we've seen recently. But what about the other side of the ball? Let's talk about the Rutgers offense. Hasn't been that bad. I mean, 76 in yards per play, 56 in success rate. This is an offense that needs to run the ball. Unfortunately, the run hasn't really been there for Rutgers the last few weeks. On the season, they're 72nd in yards per carry, 35th in success rate per rush, 34th in effective rush. Matched up against a Minnesota defense that's pretty damn good. 17th in yards per play, 45th in success rate. Against the run, they're 47th in yards per carry allowed, 41st in success rate. Solid numbers against the pass as well. I mentioned how the Rutgers rushing attack seems to be trending in the wrong direction. Through the first 4 games, they were averaging over 5.4 yards per carry as a team, over 50% success rate per rush, 237.8 rushing yards per game. We certainly have not been seeing the same production recently. In their last 4 games, down to 3.64 yards per carry as a team. So Rutgers even struggling to run the ball as of late, and the Minnesota run defense seems to be heating up. In the last 3 games, allowing just 3.28 yards per carry, 31% success rate per rush, under 89 rushing yards allowed per game. So Minnesota's been defending the run well, and Rutgers is struggling to get the run going. In my opinion, this game comes down to, and this sounds terrible, Kaliakmanis on the season, 1,650 yards, 6.8 yards per attempt, 9 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. I'm not going to pretend that it's been all bad. We have seen a few bright moments from Kaliakmanis. Unfortunately, in the last 5 games, they're averaging just 5.86 yards per pass attempt, 36% success rate per dropback. That's pretty terrible, but he did play well in the UCLA game. Unfortunately, they were playing from behind. But 287 yards passing in the game, 56.7% success rate per dropback, 9.6 yards per pass attempt. So Kaliakmanis is capable of having a good game. We have seen it. Not all that often, but we have seen it. But you know what? Minnesota's numbers against the pass seem to be trending in the wrong direction. Through the first 6 games, they were averaging just 114 passing yards allowed per game, 4.52 yards per attempt, 33.2% success rate per dropback, racked up some really elite numbers against the pass against some bad offenses. In the last 3 games, we're seeing that this Minnesota defense against the pass can be vulnerable. Over 280 passing yards allowed per game, 47.6% success rate per dropback, 7.47 yards per pass attempt. So as crazy as it sounds, I think Cali McManus might be able to make some throws on Minnesota at home here. I think 6.5 is a bit too many. Brosmer on the road where he hasn't been as good. Minnesota rushing attack hasn't been that consistent. I lean towards the Rutgers side here, plus 6.5. Unfortunately, I can't bet this one. I'm in New Jersey, so I'm unable to bet this one, but it would be Rutgers plus 6.5 for me here. Next game. Next up, we got Purdue in Columbus. Ohio State is laying 37.5 or even 38. Wow, 38 points. Total sitting at 53.5. Let's take a look at the pie charts. And according to this data, action is coming in on the Boilermakers. Over 90% of the tickets, over 90% of the money coming in on Purdue. Obviously, take this with a grain of salt. So let's get into this matchup briefly. I'm not going to spend a ton of time talking about this game. You can see this is a violently blatant mismatch here. Ohio State, according to FEI ratings, second defensively against the 79th rated offense in Purdue. Ohio State's offense fourth versus the 117th ranked defense in Purdue. So yeah, safe to say we're looking at a bit of a mismatch here. The only logical argument you could make for a Purdue bet is the spot for Ohio State coming off the biggest win of the year on the road at Happy Valley. Now come back home laying 38 points in a game they probably don't care much about. Do they even care to win by 38 points? So I guess I would lean towards Purdue. I can assure you, not a dollar of my money will be going on this game. So let's say Purdue plus 38 next. Florida on the road in Texas. Florida apparently announced that Billy Napier will be the coach next year. So Billy Napier makes it through the season, or at least it looks like it up to this point. Longhorns laying 21.5 points at home. Total sitting at 47 or 47.5, depending on your sports book. Take a look at the pie charts. According to the data, action seems to be coming in on the Gator side. 60% of the tickets, just over 50% of the money. Take it with a grain of salt. So let's get into this matchup, and we'll start with the Florida offense against the Texas defense. And we can poke holes in the Texas offense. We were criticizing their strength of schedule, right? They hadn't seen many legitimate defenses heading into that Georgia game, and that was one of my main reasons for taking Georgia in the game against Texas. But when it comes to the Texas defense, they have my respect. This might be the best defense in the country. They're first in yards per play, 6th in success rate, elite numbers against the run, elite numbers against the pass. Now, we do have to give Florida some credit offensively. In fact, I think Florida deserves credit on both sides of the ball. I think after that Texas A&M home blowout, everyone, including myself, was expecting Florida to just punt on the season. Billy Napier is going to get fired. I mean, this team hasn't quit. They're still battling. They're playing tough games. Their offensive numbers on the season, 58th in yards per play, 41st in success rate. Passing numbers look really good, 29th in yards per pass, then 55th in success rate per dropback. We know a lot of this production came with Graham Mertz at quarterback, who's out for the season. DJ Lagway, their highly touted freshman quarterback, he was making some plays as well. He's probably not playing in this game. So they're down to their third string quarterback here on the road in Texas. And in case you haven't been watching Texas football, in their last 4 games against Mississippi State, Oklahoma, okay, Oklahoma's offense sucks, Georgia, Vanderbilt, they're allowing just 17.5 points per game, 4 yards per play. That's really impressive. 4 yards per play allowed, 36.6% success rate. And we got Aiden Warner coming into Texas trying to move the ball in this defense. Or I should say, we think it's going to be Aiden Warner. They haven't officially announced whether or not DJ Lagway is going to play. From what I'm reading, I personally don't think he's going to play. I think we are going to see Aiden Warner. And last game against Georgia, 7 of 22, 66 yards, 0 touchdowns and interception, 47.9 passer rating. And you could say, yeah, Kyle, that was against Georgia. Well, this is against Texas, and this one is a true road game. That game against Georgia was a neutral site. He's going into a hostile environment here. If Aiden Warner is starting at quarterback, I don't know how we can have faith on Florida consistently moving the ball and putting up points in this one. But what about the other side of the ball? Because like I said, when it comes to the Texas offense, we are able to poke holes. Numbers look great on the season. They were racking up numbers against some bad teams early on. They're 19th in yards per play, 24th in success rate. Passing numbers look excellent. 16th in yards per pass attempt, 43rd in success rate per dropback, 14th in effective pass. Matched up against a Florida defense that, I mean, it hasn't nearly been as bad as we thought it was going to be. After that Miami game, the opener, we were all like, Florida's defense is absolutely terrible. They've actually played some decent games. On the season, they're sitting at 63rd in yards per play, 100th in success rate. So, I mean, it's not good, but it hasn't been practical joke bad. They've actually shown us some decent defensive performances. And the Texas offense, what's going on here? Through the first 5 games, they were averaging over 43 points per game, over 50% success rate, 7.2 yards per play. In their last 2 games against Georgia and Vanderbilt, just 21 points per game, 4.5 yards per play is bad, 34.8% success rate. So in the last 2 games, we've seen the Texas offensive production just fall off a cliff here. And like I said, this Florida team's playing some defense. In their last 5 games against Mississippi State, who, by the way, has a decent offense. It's their defense that's terrible. UCF, good offense. Tennessee, Kentucky, that offense has been a little shaky. And Georgia. So it's not like they're playing nobody. In their last 5 games against those 5 teams, they're allowing just 23.6 points per game. 44.9% success rate isn't great. Just 5.05 yards per play. So again, this Florida defense really hasn't been that bad. So you might be thinking, all right, let's go take the plus 21.5 then. Florida's playing some solid defense. Texas offensively hasn't looked the same. Plus 21.5, that's a big number. Here's the problem with that, and here's why I kind of lean the other way. I hate this matchup for Florida offensively so much. I could see Florida's offense gifting Texas a touchdown or 2 in this game. 21.5 is a huge number, but if we're not expecting Florida to even reach 10, 14 points, it's not going to take a whole lot from Texas to cover it. So I actually lean towards the other way, towards Texas minus the points. I wish I grabbed the 21. It would be Texas minus the points under or Florida team total under. One of those. I haven't bet this one yet. I'm still going through the games. I'll let you know on the live show if I end up betting it, or you can go check on the website and see all the bets I've posted. As of right now, I haven't posted a bet on this game. It'll be Texas under, Florida team total under, somewhere in there. Next game, Syracuse on the road at Boston College. BC laying 2. There are a couple 2.5s, mostly 2 though. Points at home here, total sitting at 52.5. Let's get into this matchup, and we'll start with the Syracuse offense. As we know, they are capable of being a very dangerous passing attack. They're 74th in yards per pass attempt, but 21st in success rate per dropback, 9th in effective pass, 33rd in OFEI. Run game has been disappointing this year from Syracuse, just 124th in yards per carry on the season. This might actually be a decent matchup for the Syracuse offense. Boston College defensively, pretty average looking numbers here across the board on the season. They're 54th in DFEI, but they've just been getting lit up through the air. In their last 3 games, 238 passing yards allowed per game. That's not a crazy amount. 57.4% success rate per dropback, 8.53 yards per pass attempt. So when their opponent drops back to pass, Boston College is struggling. In case you haven't watched Syracuse play this year, that's all they do. I think they're 3rd in the country in pass frequency. All they do is throw the ball. So at first glance, this is definitely not looking like a great matchup for the Boston College defense. Kyle McCord, we know that Pittsburgh game was disgusting. I had Syracuse team total over in that game. He threw, I think, 5 picks. 3 of them went for 6. It was disgusting. On the season, though, over 2,700 yards. I mean, they're averaging like 360 passing yards a game, this Syracuse offense. 7.2 yards per attempt, 21 touchdowns, 12 interceptions. Again, 5 of them came in one game. So obviously keep that in mind when you're looking at these numbers. Now, I will say Boston College is coming off a bye week. And like I said, they got lit up through the air in their last 3 games. So obviously, if I'm the Boston College coaching staff, during the bye week, what's the one thing I'm working on? Stopping the pass. You got Syracuse coming up. You got an extra week. Prepare for the pass. So I don't like that, because you look at these numbers, you're like, oh, Kyle McCord's going to throw the ball all over BC. I'm a little worried that they got 2 weeks to prepare for this game, and they know exactly what Syracuse is going to try to do. I don't necessarily love that, and it's not like we can count on Syracuse to give McCord any sort of run support. They haven't been able to run the ball all year. In their last 6 games, they're averaging just 2.73 yards per carry as a team, 44.6% success rate per rush, under 84 rushing yards per game. This is not a team you can count on running the ball. And Boston College defensively, it hasn't been the greatest year. We talked about that already, but they have played significantly better defense at home. In their home games, they're allowing just 17.5 points per game, 4.75 yards per play. So you look at the numbers, and at first glance, you might think McCord's going to throw the ball all over Boston College. I'm not so sure. I think Boston College at home, where they've played better defense, an extra week to prepare, I could see Boston College putting together a decent defensive effort here. But what about the other side? What about the Boston College offense against the Syracuse defense? Both of these units have been pretty disappointing, if we're being honest. Syracuse defensively, 96th in yards per play, 103rd in success rate. Not great looking numbers against the run, not great looking numbers against the pass, against a BC offense that's been a disappointment. I mean, we thought Boston College was going to be able to run the ball this year. We have not seen it. 104th in the country in yards per carry, 104th in success rate per rush. Passing attack has been okay. When Castellanos has time to throw, he's able to make some plays, but that's an if. If Castellanos has time to throw. It's a big if there. Like I said, Boston College hasn't been able to run the ball at all. In their last 6 games, just 3.38 yards per carry, 40.2% success rate. This is an offense that wanted to run the ball coming into the season, and it really hasn't been there. Here are Castellanos splits. I mean, you already know what this looks like if you've watched Boston College play. When he has a clean pocket, he could be the man. When you put pressure on him, it could get ugly here for Boston College. And unfortunately for Castellanos, Syracuse doesn't do many things defensively, but one thing they do is pressure the passer. They're 55th in the country in pressure rate, 40th in sack rate, 40th in pass rush grade. So it might not be a great matchup for Castellanos here. You look at the Syracuse defensive numbers on the season, and you think, Castellanos at home, he'll definitely make some plays. I don't really know about that. Syracuse can pressure the passer, and also, we mentioned Boston College hasn't been able to run the ball. Well, Syracuse defense, yeah, they got ran all over by Virginia Tech. I mean, 249 yards on the ground in that game. In their 3 games before that against UNLV, NC State, and Pitt, just 94 rushing yards allowed per game, 38% success rate per rush, 4.15 yards per carry. So prior to the Virginia Tech game, Syracuse actually was playing some decent defense against the run. So Boston College should continue to struggle to run the ball. It's a lot of pressure on Castellanos. Pass rush is coming. I don't like the matchup for Boston College offensively either. So I know taking an under in this game, and it's supposed to be good weather too, which I hate. Give me some shitty weather and I would hammer this under. It's at 52.5. There's a 53 there. I might take it. I mean, I like the matchup for both defenses. I just don't like how both offenses like to throw the ball. Makes it easy to get up and over the total, but give me under 53. Next game, Hurricanes on the road at Georgia Tech here. Georgia Tech catching, looks like 11 points at home. Total sitting at 63.5 pretty much across the board. Let's get into this one, and we'll start with some head-to-head history. Georgia Tech has actually been a headache for Miami. We all remember last year's game. Miami had the game won. Instead of kneeling on it, they run the ball, fumble, and then lose. That was talked about for weeks. But even prior to that, Georgia Tech's 5-1 against the spread in their last 6 games against Miami. So Georgia Tech has actually been a thorn in Miami's side. Obviously, when we're talking about this Miami team, we know we're talking about probably the best offense in college football, certainly the best passing attack. They lead the country in yards per play, 3rd in success rate. Look at the passing numbers. 4th in yards per pass attempt, 9th in success rate per dropback, 2nd in effective pass. Miami sitting at 2nd in overall OFEI. And you might look at Georgia Tech and be like, Miami's going to put up 70 points. And you know what? They might, but Georgia Tech's defense may not be quite as bad as you think. In fact, they seem to be improving as the year progresses. In their last 4 games against Duke, North Carolina, Notre Dame, Virginia Tech, solid competition. It's not like they're playing scrubs. So in their last 4 games against those 4 teams, just 193 passing yards allowed per game, 6.25 yards per pass attempt, 37.9% success rate per dropback. Georgia Tech's been playing some defense against the pass recently. Now you might be thinking, well, Kyle, Miami can also run the ball though. What about stopping the run? And you'd be right. I mean, Miami, 5.53 yards per carry on the season, 54.9% success rate per rush, over 186 rushing yards per game. They can run the ball, but check this out. In their last 5 games, Georgia Tech's actually been defending the run against Louisville, Duke, North Carolina, Notre Dame, Virginia Tech. Solid competition, just 4 yards per carry, 39% success rate per rush. So don't look now, but this Georgia Tech defense is actually playing some football recently. Now, does that mean they could stop Miami, maybe the best offense in all of college football? Probably not, but I think most people might be looking at this game thinking, we got this elite offense against this terrible defense. That's not the case. Georgia Tech is playing some good defense right now. Now, on the other side of the ball, Miami's defense definitely not looking as elite as the offense. In fact, Miami's kind of turned it into the Boston Celtics of college football. We're going to let you score because we're going to score more than you. If you've watched Miami football recently, you know that teams can definitely score points on Miami. I mean, their numbers on the year do look pretty good still. 32nd in yards per play, 8th in success rate. They're sitting back at 50th in DFEI. Georgia Tech offensively, it really comes down to one question. Is Haynes King going to play or not? Their numbers on the year look pretty good. We know that they would be much better than this if Haynes King didn't miss a couple games in there. But first, if you look at Miami's defensive numbers over the last 5 games, you can see this defense is very susceptible to big plays. They're allowing over 32 points per game, just 36.6% success rate. So maybe you can't consistently move the ball on Miami, but in terms of big plays, you can connect against this Miami team. And when Haynes King is on the field, Georgia Tech makes plays. In the 7 games Haynes King started, they're averaging 32.9 points per game, 50% success rate, 6.69 yards per play. In the last 2 games without Haynes King, averaging less than 10 points per game. So we're talking about a night and day difference here when Haynes King is on the field versus when he's not. Personally, if Haynes King is playing in this game, I want the points. Miami's defense has not given me much faith. Georgia Tech at home, they should be able to score. According to this article, Brent Key says he's hopeful. Haynes King is good to go. I don't know if this means anything. If you remember a couple weeks back, I took Georgia Tech plus 12.5 against Notre Dame because I thought Haynes King was going to play. Obviously, he didn't. The line closed at 14, didn't cover. So if Haynes King isn't playing, I want no part of this game. But if Haynes King is ruled in and this line is still double digits, I might take a stab on Georgia Tech here. So it'll only be Georgia Tech, but I'm not betting it unless Haynes King is playing. Next, West Virginia on the road at Cincinnati. Cincinnati laying 4.5. Looks like all the 5s are gone. This was at 5 most of the week. It's pretty much 4.5 across the board now. Total sitting at 55.5. Pretty much across the board. Let's take a look at the pie charts, and according to the data, action's coming in pretty one-sided here. 90% of the tickets on Cincinnati, 95% of the money on Cincinnati. As I always say, take this data with a grain of salt. So let's get into this matchup, and we'll start with the West Virginia offense. If you're familiar with West Virginia football, you know this offense wants to run the ball. They're 19th in OFEI. Rushing numbers, maybe not quite as explosive as we were expecting coming into the year. This was a good rushing attack last year. They brought back most of the production on the offensive side. We were expecting this to be a great rushing attack this year. They've definitely underperformed, but you can't sleep on this offense. They can move the ball. They can definitely run it. They're 58th in yards per carry as a team, 74th in success rate per rush, 11th in effective rush. So the question we need to answer is Cincinnati able to stop West Virginia from running the ball? On the season, Cincinnati's 81st in yards per carry allowed, 120th in success rate per rush. That would point towards a no answer to that question. On the last 5 games, West Virginia averaging over 5 yards per carry as a team, 41% success rate per rush, over 209 rushing yards per game. It was really just the Kansas State game. Kansas State, elite defensive front, top 25 defense, top 10 run defense probably. So Kansas State was really the only team that was able to keep West Virginia from running it. Other than that, West Virginia has been running on pretty much anyone they've seen. I know Cincinnati had some great numbers against the run in their last game against Colorado. Keep in mind, Colorado doesn't run the ball. They throw the ball with Shedeur Sanders. They don't run the ball. So I'm not impressed by these numbers here. In the 3 games before that, they were allowing over 5.3 yards per carry, almost a 50% success rate per rush, 206 rushing yards per game. So I do think West Virginia is able to run the ball in Cincinnati. I'm pretty comfortable with that. Now, I know a lot of people are concerned with the quarterback situation here at West Virginia. It looks like Garrett Green is going to miss another game. He's considered doubtful. But honestly, I mean, I don't even know how to say his name. Marchiol? This the backup quarterback for West Virginia, started on the road in Arizona, was piecing Arizona up. 18 of 22, 198 yards, 2 touchdowns, a 187.4 passer rating. That's actually better than any FPS game that Garrett Green played this entire season. So look, it was a backup quarterback making his first start. Maybe Arizona didn't have film on him. There's a lot of aspects to this, but does this really move the needle? I mean, this kid looked excellent against Arizona. I had West Virginia in that game as a top bet, so I was loving every second of this. I don't know if I'm really worried about Garrett Green being out for this game. Keep in mind, like I said, West Virginia is an offense that wants to run the ball. This is also an offense that's had no problem scoring points on the road this year. In their 3 road games at Pitt, Oklahoma State, Arizona, averaging over 34 points per game, over 6.3 yards per play, 41.6% success rate. So I trust this West Virginia offense. Even on the road here, even with a backup quarterback, I think we can count on WVU to score some points in this game. I like him to get the run game going. This quarterback showed us he can sling it. I'm in. I like West Virginia to score some points. But what about the other side of the ball? We got the Cincinnati offense, and this is where it becomes a problem for WVU. They cannot defend the pass at all. 133rd in the country in yards per pass attempt allowed, 119th in success rate per dropback, 128th in effective pass. It's been one of the worst pass defenses in the entire country this year so far. And they're matched up against a Cincinnati offense that out of nowhere has a very good passing attack with Sorsby. They're 52nd in the country in yards per pass attempt, 7th in success rate per dropback, 20th in effective pass. Sorsby having an electric season kind of out of nowhere. Was not expecting this at all. Over 2,100 yards, 8.1 yards per attempt, 15 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. Not a ton of big downfield throws, but he's efficient, protects the ball, and they score points. West Virginia in their 7 FBS games allowing over 254 passing yards per game, over 49% success rate per dropback, 9.73 yards per attempt. They've had no answer for a passing attack. On the road in Cincinnati coming off a bye, Sorsby should have a big game throwing the ball. So as much as I like West Virginia to score points, I like Cincinnati to score them right back, which is why I like the over here. I think this one's going to be a shootout. I lean towards West Virginia with the points. I don't think either of these teams should be laying more than 3. So it's at plus 4.5 now. I would lean that way. But personally, just give me one of those 55.5s. I'll take the over. Next game. Possibly game of the week here. We got Georgia on the road at Ole Miss. Rebels catching 2.5 points at home. Total sitting at 55.5. Pretty much a couple 55s out there. Let's take a look at this matchup, and we'll start with the Georgia offense. Certainly not what we were expecting. Can't really tell from these numbers. They're 28th in yards per play, 33rd in success rate. Passing numbers look great. 35th in yards per pass attempt, 25th in success rate per dropback, 5th in effective pass. They're going to have their hands full here on the road at Ole Miss. I know Ole Miss offensively has had their share of problems this year, but the defense has been as good as advertised. 3rd in the country in yards per play, 5th in success rate, elite numbers against the run, 2nd in yards per carry allowed, 10th in success rate per rush, solid numbers against the pass as well. This Ole Miss defense is sitting at 8th in DFEI. So the question is, do we trust Carson Beck on the road at Ole Miss here? And I'm afraid the answer has to be no. He's got over 2,300 yards passing, 7.9 yards per attempt, 17 touchdowns. But what the hell with the interceptions? 11 interceptions. He did such a good job protecting the football last year. Coming into this season, he was being talked about as possibly the #1 overall pick in the NFL draft. Can't stop throwing picks. Look at the Georgia passing numbers in the last 2 games. Production is way down. Under 40% success rate per dropback, just 6 yards per pass attempt, 242 passing yards per game. Up against an Ole Miss pass defense that's been pretty much elite this entire season. In their first 8 games, 5.98 yards per pass attempt allowed, 32.6% success rate per dropback, under 218 passing yards allowed per game. Now, you can look at the last game and be like, Kyle, what about Arkansas? Most of this was in garbage time. I mean, Ole Miss was beating the hell out of them, sitting back in coverage, up multiple scores. This is not an accurate representation of how that game went. Yeah, Arkansas had a lot of offensive numbers here throwing the ball, but Ole Miss beat the hell out of the Hogs in that game. The big question in this matchup is right here, the Ole Miss pass rush, because this is one of the best pass rushers in the country. 3rd in sack rate, 5th in pressure rate, 5th in pass rush grade. The reason I'm bringing this up, Georgia, as many problems as they've had across the board, their pass protection is elite. One of the best pass protections in the entire country. 5th in sack rate allowed, 15th in pressure rate. They've done an excellent job giving Carson Beck time to throw, and when he has a clean pocket, he does make the throws for the most part. I mean, when he gets under pressure, it's a nightmare. We've seen the interceptions, but when given a clean pocket, he can definitely beat you. So what gives here? Something's got to give. The Ole Miss pass rush, which has been elite, unbeatable, or the Georgia pass protection, which has been almost unbeatable also. I personally think on the road we can count on Ole Miss to disrupt a few plays, but this Georgia offensive line is definitely good and deserves our respect. One thing we have seen in the last few games is Georgia finally showing us something that resembles a rushing attack. In their last 3 games, 4.74 yards per carry as a team, 44.9% success rate per rush. If you've watched Georgia football this year, you know the run game's been a problem. Georgia, one of the most dominant rushing attacks in college football for like a decade, back-to-back years where they haven't had the best rushing attack. So it's a good sign that they've been able to run the ball in their last few games. Here's the problem. Good luck trying to run the ball on the road at Ole Miss. On the season, they're allowing 2.28 yards per carry as a team, 34.6% success rate per rush, just 82.2 rushing yards allowed per game. So even though Georgia is showing signs of life in terms of running the ball, I don't think it's going to happen here on the road at Ole Miss. So between Carson Beck's interception problems, the Ole Miss pass rush, lack of run support, I don't like this matchup for the Bulldogs offense. I don't have the faith in Carson Beck that I once did. So I think they're going to be in a situation here against this defense. But what about on the other side, the Georgia defense against the Ole Miss offense? And this one is a little tricky. It's basically a question of who do you think is back? On the season, both of these units look elite across the board. Georgia 3rd in DFEI, Ole Miss 5th in OFEI. Georgia's defense 15th in yards per play, Ole Miss offense 2nd in yards per play. Elite numbers across the board from both of these units. But we saw both of these units go through flat spots. Georgia got absolutely cooked by Alabama into another planet. And Ole Miss, there were 3 or 4 games there where they couldn't do anything offensively. Did they snap out of it? Last week on the road at Arkansas, a defense that's been pretty good this year, 562 passing yards, over 65% success rate per dropback, 16.5 yards per pass attempt. So does this mean Jackson Dart and the Ole Miss offense is back? And on the other side, we asked the same question. Georgia's defense, are they back? Last 2 games, 17.5 points per game allowed, just 3.7 yards per play. One of those games was against Texas, on the road in Texas, mind you. So Georgia's defense looking like they're living up to their hype as well. Look at their pass defense numbers in the last 2 games. 171.5 passing yards per game allowed per game, 4.35 yards per attempt. So in my opinion, on this side of the ball, it comes down to which of those units you think is back. Personally, I think it's tough to call the Ole Miss offense versus the Georgia defense, but I do like the matchup for the Ole Miss defense against Carson Beck and the Georgia offense, which I no longer trust. So catching points at home, give me the Rebels. Ole Miss plus 2.5. I see a juice 3. I'm going to take it. Ole Miss plus 3 next game. Iowa State on the road at Kansas. Jayhawks catching 3 points at home. Total sitting at 50.5 across the board. Let's start with some matchup history. Kansas has actually taken back-to-back games. 2 wins, 2 covers in a row for Kansas State. Before that, Iowa had won 7 straight. So Kansas coming into this one off back-to-back wins against this Cyclones program. What do we think about the matchup for the Iowa State offense? Well, they should have no problem moving the ball here. 35th in the country in yards per play, 70th in success rate. Look at the passing numbers. 24th in yards per pass attempt, 52nd in success rate per dropback, 36th in effective pass. Rocco Becht having a great season, although he's coming off back-to-back shaky games. But on the year, over 2,000 yards, 8.2 yards per attempt, 13 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. In his last 2 games, like I said, not the most impressive numbers here. Over 286 passing yards per game, but just 37.3% success rate per dropback, 6.85 yards per pass attempt. Not exactly what we were seeing from him earlier in the season. And Texas Tech and UCF, those are not secondaries that should be giving you problems. So maybe a little bit of a concern here. Personally, I think we've seen enough out of Rocco Becht from last season and most of this season to disregard them, or at least still have some faith in him, because we've seen him have so many good games. We've seen him play some good games on the road. But I do have to admit, I'm a little concerned that Kansas seems to be playing some better defense against the pass. In their first 2 conference games against West Virginia and TCU, they allowed over 325 passing yards per game, 50.7% success rate per dropback, 9.7 yards per attempt. In their 3 Big 12 games since then, Arizona State, Houston, Kansas State, granted, not the most dynamic passing attacks here. Numbers look much better. 220.7 yards per game, 39.1% success rate per dropback, 7.17 yards per pass attempt. Again, you do have to take into consideration the opponents. Arizona State is a run-first program. Houston's offense has been god-awful for most of the year, and Kansas State run-first program all the way. Rocco Becht and Iowa State, on paper, a much better passing attack than these 3 programs. So let's give some credit to Kansas. They are playing better defense against the pass. They were struggling earlier in the year. But I still think Rocco Becht, coming off back-to-back shaky games, is able to throw the ball in this one. And I think he'll have run support as well. In their last 3 games, Kansas allowing over 5.7 yards per carry, 55.7% success rate per rush is bad, over 213 rushing yards per game. So I expect Rocco Becht to have some run support. I think it's a great bounce-back spot for the Iowa State offense. Great bounce-back spot for Rocco Becht. I expect them to score points here on the road. On the other side of the ball, though, this actually might be a nice matchup for Kansas offensively. This is an offense that wants to run the ball, and that's how you beat this Iowa State defense. You run it on them. They've got great numbers against the pass. 2nd in the country in yards per pass attempt allowed, 42nd in success rate per dropback, 2nd in effective pass. But look at their numbers against the run. 102nd in the country in yards per carry allowed, 78th in success rate per rush. And if you look at the Kansas side of this graphic, 10th in the country in yards per carry, 13th in success rate per rush, 8th in effective rush. We know Kansas wants to run the ball. They do not want the game to come down to Jalen Daniels throwing it, although he has been better as of late. But on the season, not the best numbers. Throwing the ball, 7.1 yards per attempt, 11 touchdowns, 9 interceptions, D+ turnover-worthy play rate. If you remember, early in the season, he could not stop throwing interceptions. So they want to run the ball. Their offensive line's been great. Third in run blocking grade, third in line yards, second in stuff rate. They're great at creating space in the run game. On the season, they're averaging 5.9 yards per carry, over 212 rushing yards per game, 49.6% success rate per rush against an Iowa State run defense that's struggling. In their last 4 games, allowing over 5.7 yards per carry, 50% success rate per rush, 178 rushing yards per game. So Iowa State struggling to stop the run. Kansas, an offense that wants to run the ball at home. It's actually a nice matchup for the Kansas offense. Now, I know you can look at the Kansas passing numbers in the last 3 games and say, Kyle, Jalen Daniels has looked a lot better, and that's true. 8.97 yards per pass attempt, 238.7 passing yards per game, 52.4% success rate per dropback. But the thing is, against Iowa State, I really don't expect that to happen. I mean, Iowa State's been so good against the pass all year. Just 4.79 yards per pass attempt, 34.7% success rate per rush, 146.6 passing yards allowed per game. This pass defense has been elite, so even though Jalen Daniels has looked better, I don't expect it to be there in this one, but I do like Kansas to run the ball, which is why I took the over. 50.5, I bet this one. Give me the over next game. Michigan on the road in Indiana, and the Hoosiers are now laying 14.5 points. This is so crazy. I don't think I've ever seen anything like this. I'm pretty sure the look-ahead line for this game was Michigan minus double digits, like 10 or 11. Hoosiers are laying 14.5. Which is, this is truly crazy. 49.5 is the total across the board. We take a look at the matchup history. It's been very one-sided. Michigan has won, 10 of the last 11. As far as against the number, Indiana has covered a few times, but Michigan has dominated this head-to-head matchup, and they've always been favored. In fact, in the last 11 matchups, the closest the line has ever been is Michigan -7. Now it's Indiana -14.5. Just a complete changing of the tide here in this head-to-head matchup. So is the 14.5 point line warranted? Have they taken it too far here? And honestly, I don't think they have. I mean, Indiana's been great on both sides of the ball. Michigan, as we know, the offense has been a struggle this year. 104th in yards per play, 79th in success rate. Very one-dimensional, although Davis Warren has made a few throws recently. But as we know, Michigan on the season needs to run the ball. They're 45th in yards per carry, 62nd in success rate per rush, 16th in effective rush. Passing numbers look terrible. Now, if you look at the last couple games, Davis Warren, like I said, he's made a couple throws. It's not quite as bad as it was earlier in the season, but still, this is not a passing attack that strikes any sort of fear in you. Michigan has to run the ball to be successful. But you know what? Recently, they've even had problems doing that. In their last 3 games, they're averaging just 3.48 yards per carry as a team, 40.4% success rate per rush, under 113 rushing yards per game. And Indiana, in case you haven't heard, you don't run the ball on this team. They're allowing just 2.52 yards per carry as a team, 33.8% success rate per rush, under 73 rushing yards allowed per game. And it makes sense because if you remember, Cignetti comes from James Madison. Last year, James Madison had a record-breaking run defense, the best run defense the Sun Belt Conference has ever seen or some shit. And he brought some of his pieces with them. So it completely makes sense that he brought that same sort of philosophy. This is an elite run defense. And although Michigan does have some talent, I don't expect them to be able to run the ball in this game. Now, like I mentioned before, Davis Warren has had some success throwing the ball in the last couple games. 155.5 passing yards per game, 6.95 yards per pass attempt, 44.4% success rate per dropback. You might look at these numbers thinking, Kyle, these aren't even good. It's way better than the passing production we were getting from Michigan earlier in the season. So Michigan actually does have something that resembles a passing attack now. And Indiana, I mean, their numbers against the pass not as good as their numbers against the run. In the last 2 games, they're allowing 7.35 yards per pass attempt, 41.4% success rate per dropback. I mean, not that these numbers are bad. They always have big leads, so teams are dropping back to pass on them a lot. I wouldn't read too much into it. I don't think Michigan's going to be able to throw the ball either, but maybe you could say Davis Warren can make some throws. As a whole, it's going to be a struggle for Michigan offensively. Now, what about on the other side of the ball, though? Because although we can make fun of the Michigan offense, it's been pretty bad this year. The defense has been pretty solid. They're 32nd in the country in yards per play, 53rd in success rate, solid numbers against the run, decent numbers against the pass, although they've been struggling against the pass a little bit recently. They're sitting at 26 in DFEI, but still, the Indiana offense, I don't even know how we can doubt this unit. They're just running the score up on every single team they see. They're 13th in the country in yards per play, 1st in success rate. Look at their passing numbers. 6th in yards per pass attempt, 1st in success rate per dropback, 8th in effective pass. I mean, this is looking like one of the most dominant offenses in college football. Yes, they've seen some questionable defenses, but recently they started seeing some tougher opponents, and it hasn't mattered. I mean, should they beat Washington by 2 touchdowns with a backup quarterback? Curtis Rourke is looking like a Heisman Trophy candidate, over 2,200 yards, 10.4 yards per attempt, 19 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. In the games Curtis Rourke has started, which is 8 of their 9, over 304 passing yards per game, 62.7% success rate per dropback is just silly, 10.75 yards per attempt. Nobody can stop this passing attack. And like I said, Michigan's been struggling against the pass in their last couple games. Granted, it was against Oregon and Michigan State with Aiden Childs, but Indiana might belong in the conversation with Oregon, honestly. In the last 2 games, 241.5 passing yards allowed per game, 47.2% success rate per dropback, 8.4 yards per attempt. So Michigan's been struggling to defend the pass. Now, if you are looking to take the 14.5 with Michigan here, you can point at this. You can say, hey, Kyle, Indiana might not be able to run the ball here. And honestly, that might be fair to say. In their last 2 games, Indiana just 3.91 yards per carry. Still a 45.7% success rate, which is nice looking. But the rushing attack hasn't been all that efficient in the last couple games. As we know, Michigan does have a dominant run defense, but honestly, even that's been falling off a little bit. Through the first 6 games, just 2.86 yards per carry, 34% success rate. In the last 3 games, I mean, 4.5 yards per carry, 50% success rate per rush. So I don't know how much faith I have in the Michigan run defense either. So where does that leave us in terms of placing a bet? I mean, 14.5 sounds crazy, but in my opinion, it's warranted. And until someone shows us they can come within 10 points of Indiana, I'm not going to bet on it happening. So it'll only be Hoosiers for me here. Indiana minus 14.5 for pass. Next game. Next up, we got a good ACC matchup here. Clemson's on the road at Virginia Tech. Hokies catching 6 or 6.5 points at home, depending on your sportsbook. Total sitting at 53 or 53.5. So let's get into this matchup, and we'll start with the Clemson offense against the Vatech defense. As I'm sure you know, Clemson, one of the best offenses in the country, 15th in yards per play, 14th in success rate, 8th in yards per carry, 5th in success rate per rush. Passing numbers look pretty solid as well. They're sitting at 8th in OFEI. They should have the edge here over the Virginia Tech defense, although Virginia Tech's been pretty solid defensively, 40th in yards per play, 54th in success rate, solid against the run, solid against the pass. Cade Klubnik having an excellent season, over 2,000 yards, 7.5 yards per attempt, 21 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, A+ turnover-worthy play rate, protecting the football. Not a ton of big downfield throws, but as a whole, he's having a great season. He should continue his great season here against Virginia Tech, who runs a lot of man coverage. 23rd in man coverage frequency. Clemson has excellent passing numbers against man coverage, top 35 in every single metric here, so it should be a favorable matchup for Cade Klubnik. Now, if you are on Virginia Tech in this game, you're looking right here. Clemson last week against Louisville couldn't really get the pass game going, just 4.1 yards per pass attempt in the game, 43.1% success rate per dropback, 228 passing yards in the game. But specifically, what's notable about this is how Louisville was able to limit the Clemson passing attack. They put pressure on Klubnik. Cade Klubnik last week was pressured on 38.7% of his dropbacks. That was 24th most in all of college football. And the reason I'm bringing this up, Virginia Tech definitely has a pass rush. In fact, they have one of the best pass rushes in the country. That edge rusher, I can't think of his name. He's got 12.5 sacks. He's going to be a first-round pick. So we got another pass rush Cade Klubnik has to deal with here. Now, to be fair, that pass rush didn't stop Kyle McCord from piecing up Virginia Tech. I mean, they just beat Vatech last week. 280 yards through the air, 42.9% success rate per dropback, 7.8 yards per attempt. So despite having this elite pass rush, you can still throw the ball on this Virginia Tech secondary if you are able to get time. And Clemson has a great offensive line, 35th in pressure rate allowed, 16th in sack rate allowed, 14th in pass blocking grade. I'm not saying the Clemson offensive line is going to be able to completely eliminate the Virginia Tech pass rush. I mean, they're crazy talented. They've got an NFL edge rusher there. I'm sure they'll make some plays, but Clemson's offensive line is good enough to ensure Cade Klubnik will have some clean pockets to throw from. And based on what we've seen from the Virginia Tech secondary, man coverage, Cade Klubnik against man coverage, he should be able to make some throws. And also, we just mentioned how Syracuse was able to throw the ball in the Virginia Tech. Clemson has something that Syracuse doesn't have: run support. In fact, since that week 1 game against Georgia where they couldn't run the ball at all, they've been running the ball on everybody. Over 225 rushing yards per game, 6.1 yards per carry, 53% success rate per rush. If you look at the Virginia Tech run defense numbers over the last 4 games, it looks like they've been playing great against the run. 3.41 yards per carry allowed, 45.6% success rate per rush though. But more importantly, look at the opponents. Stanford can't run the ball. Boston College hasn't been able to run the ball all year. Georgia Tech, they played without Haynes King, the backup quarterback. That offense is terrible without Haynes King. And Syracuse, they can't run the ball at all. That's a passing offense. If you look at their first 5 games of the season when they actually saw some offenses that can run the ball, Miami, Rutgers, I mean, they saw some offenses that are capable of running the ball, the run defense didn't look nearly as good. 4.51 yards per carry allowed, 40.7% success rate per rush, over 177 rushing yards allowed per game. So I definitely think Clemson's able to run the ball in this game as well. Don't really like the matchup for Virginia Tech defensively. I think Clemson should be able to put points on the board. On the other side, we got the Virginia Tech offense. Year-long numbers aren't quite what we expected them to be, although they're playing much better as of late. On the season, 46 in yards per play, 83rd in success rate. Rushing, they're 18th in yards per carry, 75th in success rate per rush, 18th in effective rush, which does play into the weakness of this Clemson defense. 87th in yards per carry allowed, 95th in success rate per rush. But as we've said multiple times through the season, the Clemson defensive numbers need to be taken with a grain of salt. They've given up so many points and so many yards in garbage time of blowout games that it's hard to take these numbers seriously. We know the Clemson defense is a lot more elite than these numbers are showing, so I don't know how seriously I take these numbers. Kyron Drones' numbers on the year, not great throwing the ball. I mean, 1,446 yards, 7.1 yards per attempt, 10 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. But in the last 4 games, Virginia Tech has been pretty efficient with their passing attack. 176.3 passing yards per game, 46.2% success rate per dropback is cool, 8.28 yards per attempt. So no question, Kyron Drones seems to be playing his best football in the last handful of games as opposed to the first few. Here's the problem. Nobody has been throwing the ball on Clemson. In their last 4 games, they're allowing just 202 passing yards per game, 35.1% success rate per dropback, 5.98 yards per pass attempt. I know Virginia had some passing stats against Clemson, but again, a lot of that came in garbage time. Virginia came back and backdoored covered. Whoever had Clemson was probably pissed at that. But Virginia Tech drove up and down the field twice late in the game when Clemson was up like 24 points or something. So the point I'm making is nobody has been able to throw the ball in this Clemson defense. And although Kyron Drones has been playing better, I still don't trust him to make throws on this defense. But when we look at these numbers right here, this is what you're looking at if you're betting Virginia Tech. The run game. In their last 3 games, they're averaging 240 rushing yards per game, 6.1 yards per carry, over 46% success rate per rush. And we just saw Louisville have no problems running the ball in Clemson. 7.78 yards per carry allowed, 44% success rate, 210 rushing yards. So that's your angle. If you're on VOD Tech here, you're taking points with the home team and you're expecting them to be able to run the ball. It's a solid angle. I don't hate that. Personally, I like the angle for Clemson's offense a little better. Think they're going to be able to put up a big number in this one. I also could see them really shoring up in the run defense department, especially after what happened last week against Louisville. So I think Clemson wins this one by more than a touchdown personally. I haven't bet it yet. I might though. I'm still zeroing in. I'm still going through the games as I'm recording this, but it'll only be Clemson for me here. I'll let you know in the live show if I actually bet it, or you can go on the website and click on open bets to see if I've placed the bet. As of right now, Clemson or pass. Next game. Duke is on the road at North Carolina State. NC State laying 3 points at home, total sitting at 51.5. Let's take a look at the matchup for the Duke offense, and we know what this Duke offense is. They need to throw the ball. They have no rushing attack whatsoever. Their entire offense is Malik Murphy, and we know the story with him. If he has time to throw in the pocket, he can beat you. If he doesn't, it's going to be a long night. Duke on the season, 108th in yards per pass attempt, 70th in success rate per dropback, 46th in effective pass. Offense as a whole sitting at 85th in OFEI. Matched up against an NC State defense that really has underperformed this year. 76 in yards per play allowed, 86 in success rate. Numbers against the run, numbers against the pass, not particularly great. Malik Murphy coming off a huge game against Miami, 325 yards, 7.9 yards per attempt. Duke was winning for a lot of the game, and Duke definitely need to see that because the 4 games before that, the passing game was struggling. Just 5.43 yards per attempt, 35.5% success rate per dropback. And I do have some good news if you're betting Duke here. NC State's been struggling to defend the pass. In their last 3 games, 267 passing yards allowed per game, 49.7% success rate per dropback, 8.47 yards per attempt. So that's a solid matchup against a Duke offense. All they want to do is throw the ball. We know Malik Murphy isn't going to have run support because he never has run support. On the season, Duke's averaging 3.43 yards per carry as a team, success rate per rush under 35%. So just throw the run game out. Duke doesn't run it much, and when they do, it doesn't really work. But Malik Murphy against an NC State defense that struggles against the pass, I don't hate that matchup for Duke. But honestly, the matchup on the other side is a lot more interesting. The new explosive NC State offense with CJ Bailey at quarterback. Look at their passing numbers on the year. 23rd in yards per pass attempt, 11th in success rate per dropback, 24th in effective pass. It's crazy because coming into the season, I don't think any of us would be surprised to see those numbers, but to see them after Grayson McCall got hurt with CJ Bailey at quarterback, you got to be pumped if you're an NC State fan. The offense is looking great last few games. That being said, this is going to be a challenge because Duke's defense is official. They're 32nd in the country in yards per play allowed, 38th in success rate. Look at their numbers against the pass, which is what NC State's been doing. 20th in the country in yards per pass attempt, 27th in success rate per dropback, 27th in effective pass. So this is a really tough matchup for what NC State's been doing recently. I mentioned this NC State passing attack has been on fire. Here it is. Last 3 games, 303 passing yards per game, success rate per dropback over 53%, 11.3 yards per pass attempt. Now, a little bit of an asterisk here. Syracuse defense is pretty terrible. Stanford has one of the worst pass defenses in the conference. Cal's impressive, though. They get credit for Cal. The other two, though, those are some bad defenses. Duke's defense is on another level. You can see they've been elite against the pass through their first 7 games, allowing just 153.9 passing yards per game, 35.5% success rate per dropback, 4.83 yards per pass attempt. They've been playing elite defense against the pass. Yes, I know the last 2 games got a little ugly. They were against SMU and Miami. By far the 2 most explosive passing attacks in the conference. Most defenses get lit up by these 2 offenses. Yeah, the numbers look pretty bad. I'm not reading too much into it. I mean, Miami and SMU are hanging 55 points on everybody. We know this Duke defensive line is solid. They're great against the run. They've got a pass rush, 27th in pressure rate, 13th in sack rate, which is huge because as good as CJ Bailey's been, you could rattle him with some pressure. Definitely a drop-off in production when he experiences pressure. Duke should be able to put some pressure on CJ Bailey in this game. And I know NC State went off running the ball last week against Stanford, over 7 yards per carry, 281 yards on the ground, 42.1% success rate per rush. But that's not what NC State's been doing all year. In fact, they've been struggling to run the ball all year. In the 7 games before the Stanford game, averaging just 3.14 yards per carry. And they're matched up against the Duke defense, which is allowing just 3.91 yards per carry on the season. So I don't expect the run game to be there for CJ Bailey. In my opinion, betting this game comes down to what you think about CJ Bailey and the new look NC State offense. If you're a believer, maybe I could see laying the 3. Personally, if you look at the recent schedule for these 2 teams, Duke's playing a much stronger schedule. SMU, Miami, seems like the perfect sell high spot for this NC State team. Laying a full 3, I even see a 3.5 open, juiced at -120. I might take that. Give me Duke plus 3.5. I like it at 3 too. I'm on Duke. Next game. Next up, we got the Buffs on the road in Lubbock. Texas Tech catching 4.5 points at home. Total sitting all the way up at 62.5. And here's why. Both these teams like to throw the ball a lot. Both these teams run an extremely fast pace. So yeah, we should definitely see points in this one. The question is, will either of these defenses be able to make stops? And on the Texas Tech side, I'd say probably not. On the season, they're 109th in yards per play, 96th in success rate. Their numbers specifically against the pass, because we know Colorado doesn't run the ball. 99th in yards per pass attempt allowed, 102nd in success rate per dropback. So Colorado should not have problems scoring points in this game. In the last 5, they're averaging over 318 passing yards per game, 8.9 yards per attempt, 47.8% success rate per dropback. So they've been doing fine offensively. Up against the Texas Tech defense that's been struggling to defend the pass. Over 9 yards per attempt, over 305 passing yards allowed per game. So yeah, Colorado's going to score points in this game. We don't even have to talk about that side of the ball anymore. What about the other side, though? What about Texas Tech's offense against the Colorado defense? This side is a bit tougher. Texas Tech, like we said, also an offense that wants to throw the ball. Passing numbers on the year don't look all that great. 95th in yards per pass attempt, 80th in success rate per dropback, 31st in effective pass. And Colorado's become a defensive juggernaut this year, maybe exaggerating a little. But seriously, Colorado's defense has played so well this year. They're sitting at 38th in DFEI. The good news for Texas Tech here is this game's being played at Lubbock. Dating back to last year, Baron Morton's been much, much better at home. You can see his numbers on the year. I mean, he's having a decent season. Almost 2,300 yards passing, 6.9 yards per attempt, 19 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. Those are solid-looking numbers. Specifically at home, this Texas Tech offense becomes very dangerous. In their home games, they're averaging over 45 points per game, 6.4 yards per play, 45% success rate. Their offensive line's done a great job in pass protection, 30th in pressure rate allowed, 29th in sack rate, so Baron Morton should have time to throw. I know the Texas Texas Tech run game hasn't been quite as efficient in the last few games. Through the first 5 games, 5.4 yards per carry, over 46% success rate per rush. In the last 4 games, definitely lower. 3.89 yards per carry, 46.5% success rate per rush. So they haven't been running the ball quite as efficiently, but this is an offense that wants to throw it, like I said. The problem for Texas Tech is right here. Colorado's defense out of nowhere playing excellent this year. In their 7 FBS games, they're allowing just 21.4 points per game, 37.6% success rate, 5.3 yards per play. Now, you can look at the opponents and say they haven't seen a passing attack like Texas Tech yet, and that would be fair. Not that they haven't seen legitimate competition, but if you look at their schedule here, Nebraska's offense has been terrible. Colorado State's offense has been terrible. Baylor, there's something. Baylor's been able to score some points. UCF's a rushing offense. Kansas State's a rushing offense. Arizona's been terrible. Cincinnati, maybe a little bit. They're a little more balanced. So in terms of a passing attack, Texas Tech in Lubbock will be the toughest test for Colorado. And no one's been able to stop Texas Tech at home. So I do expect them to score points, which is why I'm on the over here. I'm expecting a lot of passing, a lot of possessions. 62.5. Let's do it. Over. Next game. South Carolina on the road at Vandy. Vanderbilt catching, it's up to 5.5 now. It was just 4.5 like an hour ago, so that must have just happened. Total sitting at 45.5. Let's get into this matchup, and we'll start with the South Carolina offense against the Vanderbilt defense. And honestly, kind of a similar matchup on both sides. Both offenses should struggle to move the ball in this game. South Carolina, obviously, an offense looking to run the ball. And yeah, we've seen some big plays. We've seen some highlights. But as a whole, it hasn't been the most consistent rushing attack here. On the season, they're just 80th in yards per carry, 86 in success rate per rush. They're matched up against a Vanderbilt defense that's actually been strong against the run. 47th in yards per carry allowed, 49th in success rate per rush. I know they had a huge game last week against Texas A&M, South Carolina I'm talking about. 286 yards on the ground, 6.65 yards per carry, 50% success rate per rush. But in the 3 games before that, they were averaging less than 3 yards per carry as a team, success rate per rush under 40%. So like I said, they've broken some big plays, but it hasn't been a consistent rushing attack matched up against a Vanderbilt defense. Look at their numbers in the last 2 games against Texas and Auburn. 97 rushing yards allowed per game, 3.18 yards per carry, 37.2% success rate per rush. So I don't know if South Carolina is going to be able to run the ball in this game. The way to move the ball against Vanderbilt has been to throw it. In their last 2 games, over 263 passing yards allowed per game, 8 yards per attempt. So you can throw the ball on Vandy. But has Sellers shown us enough to lay 5.5 points on the road based solely off his arm? In my opinion, the answer is no. They did have 244 passing yards last week against Texas A&M, just a 34.6% success rate per dropback. Sellers' numbers on the season, I mean, he's developing. He's a freshman, but 1,200 yards, 7.1 yards per attempt, 7 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, a D+ big-time throw rate. So this Vanderbilt defense has been tough against the run. Don't fully trust Sellers as a thrower. I think Vanderbilt can play some good defense in this game. But then we flip it over to the other side, and Vanderbilt offensively may be in a situation here. South Carolina, one of the best defenses in the country, 3rd in yards per play, 46 in success rate, excellent numbers against the pass, solid numbers against the run. Vanderbilt, Jerry Kill, we know this is an offense that wants to run the ball, although their passing numbers look pretty efficient. 20th in yards per pass attempt, 26 in success rate, rushing numbers not so much. 104th in yards per carry, 100th in success rate per rush. Diego Pavia having himself a nice season. Again, they don't drop back to pass a whole lot. He's got 1,674 yards, 8.2 yards per attempt, 15 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, A+ turnover-worthy play rate, does not turn the ball over. Problem for Vanderbilt in this matchup is there's just such a discrepancy in talent between the Vanderbilt offensive line, here are the numbers here, against the South Carolina defensive line, which is one of the best in the country. One of the best pass rushers in the country. They're also good against the run. There's just such a talent gap here. South Carolina should dominate the battle up front here defensively. And Vanderbilt, with Jerry Kill, like I said, an offense that wants to run the ball, in the last 7 games, just 3.51 yards per carry, 38.3% success rate per rush. So they've been struggling to get the run game going. South Carolina hasn't been run on all year. On the season, they're allowing just 2.92 yards per carry as a team. So as much as I think Vanderbilt's defense is able to give South Carolina's offense some problems, really don't trust Vanderbilt offensively here. So it's either going to be under or Vanderbilt plus the points. I'm not going to lay 5.5 on the road with South Carolina. This Vanderbilt team is magic. I swear, this team is just magic. So I'm not laying points on the road to them. I think I might take Vanderbilt here. Vanderbilt plus 5.5 or a South Carolina team total under maybe. Vanderbilt plus 5.5 or South Carolina team total under. I'll let you know on the live show when I ended up betting, or you could go check the website and see. as of right now, that's what I'm leaning on. Next, Terps are on the road in Eugene, playing 24 or 24.5, depending on your sports book. Total sitting at 57.5. So what do we think about this matchup for Maryland's offense? This is an offense that wants to throw the ball. They move quickly as well. 5th in pace, 13th in pass frequency. This is going to be a tough one here. Oregon, obviously, as I'm sure you know, great defense. 17th in yards per play, 29th in success rate. Numbers against the pass look excellent. 10th in yards per pass attempt allowed, 22nd in success rate per dropback, 5th in effective pass. Maryland has no run game whatsoever. 104th in yards per carry, 102nd in success rate. This offense truly rides on whether or not Billy Edwards Jr. is able to throw the football. In the last 4 games, I mean, they're averaging over 320 passing yards per game, but they do drop back to pass a lot. Just 6.88 yards per attempt, 41.6% success rate per dropback. Not particularly great, not terrible either. But look at Oregon's numbers against the pass in the last 3 games. Under 140 passing yards allowed per game, 33.4% success rate per dropback. Now, in the 2 games before that, they actually were getting thrown on a bit by Ohio State and Michigan State. 258.5, 9 yards per attempt, 49.5% success rate per dropback. So let's not act like this Oregon pass defense is perfect. The problem is one of those teams is Ohio State, arguably the best team in the country, and the other one is Michigan State. They have Aiden Childs, who's mobile. He's an athletic quarterback. Billy Edwards Jr. really isn't, and Maryland's offensive line in terms of pass protection, 97th in pressure rate allowed, 69th in sack rate against the Oregon pass rush. Could be a situation here. 9th in pressure rate, 45th in sack rate. I will say, though, Billy Edwards Jr. has done a good job handling pressure this year. B+ pressure to sack rate, A turnover-worthy play rate. Doesn't really make a ton of throws under pressure, but he doesn't take sacks and he doesn't turn the ball over. Sometimes that's all you can ask for on the road in a hostile environment. He doesn't take sacks, doesn't turn the ball over. The issue for Maryland in this game is they're not really equipped to exploit the weakness of Oregon's defense. We're starting to see that you can run the ball on this Oregon defensive front. In the last 3 games, 4.45 yards per carry allowed, 43.5% success rate per rush. So you might be able to run the ball on this Oregon defense. Problem is, Maryland hasn't been able to run the ball all year. They're averaging 2.93 yards per carry as a team in their last 4 games. Success rate per rush under 32%. So I really don't like the matchup for Maryland offensively. Billy Edwards Jr. needs to have a career day for them to even compete in this game. And then we flip it over to the other side, and I mean, Maryland's secondary is going to be in a situation here. That's their weakness. They struggle against the pass. 111th in yards per pass attempt allowed, 96th in success rate per dropback against Dylan Gabriel, Dan Lanning in the Oregon offense. I mean, they're 7th in yards per pass attempt, 6th in success rate per dropback, 4th in effective pass. This is a tough matchup for Maryland defensively. Dylan Gabriel's got excellent numbers on the season, and he should be able to pad the shit out of them in this one. Over 2,600 yards, 9.2 yards per attempt, 19 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. In their last 4 games, Oregon's averaging over 305 passing yards per game, 10.2 yards per attempt, over 54% success rate per dropback. And in Maryland's last 4 games, they're getting cooked through the air week after week. Over 304 passing yards allowed per game, 48.7% success rate per dropback, 9.58 yards per pass attempt allowed. So like I said, this is a beautiful spot for Billy Edwards Jr. Now, Oregon has also been running the ball. Jordan James looks pretty good. In the last 5 games, they're averaging over 180 rushing yards per game, over 5 yards per carry as a team. The Terps may be equipped to slow that down. The strength of this Maryland team is the defensive front. They've been strong against the run all year, just 3.39 yards per carry allowed. The problem is I don't trust the Maryland secondary at all, and they're on the road in Eugene against Dylan Gabriel in Oregon. So it would only be Oregon for me. 24 is a lot, but Oregon could just name their number in this one. So it'll be Oregon minus 24 for me here. Next game, Mississippi State on the road at Tennessee. Vols are laying 24.5 here. Total sitting at 61.5. Won't spend a ton of time on this matchup. Obviously, this is a blatant mismatch here on both sides of the ball. Mississippi State's offense is actually decent. This kid Van Buren looks pretty good. They are capable of scoring some points, but on the road at Tennessee is crazy. Tennessee's 2nd in the country in yards per play allowed, 4th in success rate, one of the best run defenses in the country, maybe the best, 2nd in yards per carry allowed, 1st in success rate per rush, also elite against the pass. So even though I do like this Mississippi State offense, on the road in Tennessee, I can't see it happening. And on the other side of the ball, we got the Tennessee offense against Mississippi State's defense. That's a blatant mismatch. Mississippi State is a terrible defensive team on the road at Tennessee. Tennessee offensively does have their flaws. They're not perfect by any means, but Mississippi State can't stop anybody. So yeah, Tennessee should just steamroll them in every aspect of the game here. We do have to mention, though, They're going to Athens next week. Next Saturday at Georgia. Biggest game of the year. I mean, other than the Kentucky game, at Georgia. So maybe a look-ahead spot. Maybe they take their foot off the gas. So in a situation like that, not really trying to have a minus 24.5 ticket if they're going to let Mississippi State's offense, who is capable, score a couple touchdowns on their second unit. So why don't we go Tennessee first half minus 13.5 here? It should be a blowout, but I don't trust them to play all 4 quarters with Georgia on deck. So Tennessee first half minus 13.5 next game. UCF on the road at Arizona State. Arizona State laying 2.5 points at home. Total sitting at 55.5. Let's take a look at the UCF offense, which I don't know what to make of it anymore. I thought I knew what this UCF offense was. Completely relying on the run. They're 10th in run frequency on the year. But this kid, Dylan Brisk, this freshman quarterback, apparently he's Peyton Manning. On the season, 396 yards, 4 touchdowns, 10.7 yards per attempt. They went absolutely nuts last week on Arizona, and this is coming from somebody that had an Arizona plus 6.5 ticket and an Arizona moneyline ticket. They absolutely cooked them. UCF offensively on the season, 15th in yards per play, 10th in success rate. Look at the rushing numbers. 6th in yards per carry, 3rd in success rate per rush, 2nd in effective rush. Now, the good news for Arizona State is that actually plays into the strength of their defense. This has been a tough run defense all year, although Cincinnati was able to run the ball on Arizona State. But for the most part, Arizona State's been a very tough defensive front this season. So the old UCF offense, I would say this is a tough matchup for them. But this new UCF offense, I mean, they can run the ball, they can throw the ball. Last week against Arizona, check this out, where are the passing numbers? Here we go. 294 yards through the air, 11.8 yards per attempt, 52.2% success rate per dropback. That was in the rain. It was in shitty weather. It didn't matter. They were throwing the ball all over the field. So I don't know. Maybe this kid can throw it, and that would turn UCF into one of the most dynamic offenses in the entire country. They already had one of the best rushing attacks in the country. The problem is they haven't had a quarterback that could consistently give them production. KJ Jefferson was a failure in terms of a transfer this year. So if this kid can throw it, this UCF offense might be seriously dangerous. But what about on the other side of the ball? Is UCF able to make stops here? And that's a tough call. Arizona State offensively, I mean, Scottaboo's been their main guy, such an important piece. I don't think he's playing in this game. I'm not saying Sam Leavitt isn't capable of scoring points on this UCF defense without Scottaboo, but missing the best player on the offense, the most important piece of the offense, certainly is going to hurt, especially when this is a team that wants to run the ball. 14th in run frequency, and they've been really good at it. They're 35th in the country in yards per carry, 6th in success rate per rush, 12th in effective rush. Plays directly into the strength of this Central Florida defense. They're 32nd in yards per carry allowed, 11th in success rate per rush. For most of the season, the way to score points on this UCF defense was throwing the ball, which is why I like that matchup for Arizona last week. But you know what? UCF secondary seems to be getting their shit together. Also, there was bad weather, too, which I should have seen that. That was just a bad bet. Whatever, we're not talking about last Saturday. So, yeah, like I said, Sam Leavitt is capable. 1,463 yards, 8 yards per attempt, 11 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. In the last 3 games, Arizona State has been efficient throwing the ball. Just 208.7 passing yards per game. Like I said, they do want to run the ball first. But efficiency numbers, 8.53 yards per attempt, great. 45.4% success rate per dropback, great. So they have been efficient when they've thrown it. The thing is, this is a run-first offense to the maximum, and if the run game isn't there, who knows if they're able to put up efficient passing numbers like this? I would say probably not. In their last 4 games, they're averaging over 226 rushing yards per game, 5.33 yards per carry, 54.7% success rate per rush. So yeah, you can see this is an offense that wants to run the ball.
So my power just went out in the middle of recording that. It's back though, but I'm running out of time. So I like UCF in that game. A couple ones that I didn't have time to get to. I like LSU +3. I think Penn State might rout Washington. Didn't bet that one yet. There's a few others that I don't have in front of me. We'll go through them all on the live show. 10 a.m. Eastern time up to kickoff. 2 straight hours will be live. We'll go through, I think we have 26 games lined up. If you're able to make it, we'd love to see in the comments. If you want to just go look at what bets I've placed, just head over to KyleKirms.com and click on open bets. I'll post those up late tonight. So yeah, thanks for watching. See you all in the morning, 10 a.m. Eastern time.